One of the big problems, I think, with coverage of money laundering is often it can seem a quite dry, quite academic subject, because often the headlines are about compliance failures. You know, this bank was fined for compliance failures. And the public read it and think, well, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? You know, it sounds like a sort of slap on the wrist parking ticket. That's not the case. You know, that money laundering that was done through that bank would have enabled a whole bunch of quite serious crime.
Your money make a world go round.
Welcome to The Laundry, the podcast connecting AML, compliance and financial crime to the real world. I'm your host, Marit, the CEO of Strise, and in this episode we are discussing the rise of the virtual money laundering machine. Let's face it, if you're listening to this right now, you probably think technology is pretty great. In fact, you might even be listening to this while moving money online, messaging your friends or playing a mobile game on your commute. But surprisingly, there's someone else who enjoys this technological revolution as much as you or me, if not more. Yes, the criminals.
Dark web, what is it? Well, it's the bit of the web you can't get to by just typing stuff into Google. When you get there, you can find things like Alphabet. It's essentially the eBay of the underworld.
Today, the Department of Justice announces the takedown of the dark web market Alphabet.
Government crackdown on sex trafficking leads federal agents to seize and shut down the classified ads website Backpage.com.
Yesterday, developers of the Ronin network announced through a blog post that they had discovered a hacker had stolen $540 million worth of cryptocurrency.
In emotional testimony last fall, Yvonne Ambrose told a Senate panel that her 16-year-old daughter was advertised as a prostitute on the site. A man who found her online beat and choked her and cut her throat.
40,000 vendors, possibly 200,000 users, possibly 300,000 individual listings for things like heroin.
Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine in 2022 taught us a valuable lesson, which is that a country that seems very far away, doesn't seem to have much to do with you, can have a massive, massive detrimental impact on your life.
We will continue to find, arrest, prosecute, convict, and incarcerate criminals, drug traffickers, and their enablers wherever they are.
The hacker essentially gained access to 5 of the validator nodes. So essentially, they were able to forge the signatures that would be needed from the validators, and they were able to basically credit their account with funds they didn't have.
Sounds complicated, I have to say.
Money makes a world go round.
In today's episode, we are joined by the author of a new book which is spelling out the complex relationship between money laundering and organized crime, and how technology is the rocket booster underneath it all. We discuss his work in finding fascinating stories of criminals exploiting technology's weakness. What do these stories of massive financial crime tell us about the current state of technology? And what does the future look like as technology and financial crime becomes more intertwined? To dive into this topic, I'm here with Geoff White, investigative journalist and author of Rinsed, From Cartels to Crypto, How the Tech Industry Washes Money for the World's Deadliest Crooks. Geoff, thank you so much for joining me here on The Laundry for the second time or third time, I would say, since you actually also spoke at our event in Stockholm last week.
Indeed, yes. And well done on that fantastic intro. That was a long, long read of information that you got over. It's
well,
very good.
It is. You have a lot of interesting things to say, but what should people know about you, your background, and your new book?
Sure. So I'm an author and investigative journalist, and what I cover is organised crime and technology. So wherever organised crime and tech come together, that's where I tend to hang out. So I was doing a lot on computer hacking and cybercrime, but also things like, as you mentioned, money laundering and fraud and grisly stuff like prostitution, cartel drug dealing and child sexual abuse rings and all of that kind of thing. Fundamentally, the vast majority of these crimes, particularly the organised crimes, are aimed at making money. And so wherever the money goes, that's why I tend to try and follow it as a journalist. And of course, money's increasingly digitised, economy's increasingly virtual, and so increasingly those money flows are ending up in sort of technological areas.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's dive in. What made this your nerdy passion? Investigating organised crime and following where the dirty money goes. Was there a trigger event?
Yeah, my extensive criminal history. It's obviously no, I'm kidding, of course. So I started covering technology, all kinds of technology, and the problem with tech stories is, at the time, this was going back to sort of, late 2000s, sort of early part of the 2010s. Technology, I think, at that point in the news was seen as a bit of a fringe subject, or maybe a fun subject. It was the kind of thing you'd see at the end of the news program. Here's a wacky new app that you hadn't heard of, or here's Steve Jobs, unveiling the iPhone. It wasn't taken very seriously. And the problem with that is the way TV news works, I worked in TV news at the time, was you've got this program and it's half an hour long or an hour long or whatever. If you're the end story, if something happens during the day, which it inevitably does, you get pushed off the end because there's only a certain amount of room. It's not like newspapers where the front page will be hard news and then page 3 might be something a bit more fun. No, all the fun stuff's at the end. And if you're the fun stuff, you get dropped. And I just got tired of getting dropped off the end of the program. So I decided that I also wanted to do more hard news. And I realized going to these technology conferences that tech was increasingly forming part of every part of our lives, and that there were some serious crimes being committed. There was nation-state hacking, there was organised cybercrime, there was the sort of anonymous hacktivist kind of movements. There was loads going on and loads of important stuff. People losing money, companies were losing secrets, governments being broken into. And I thought, well, this deserves a place higher up the program. So I started
concentrating. It didn't get enough
on it.
Attention.
Exactly. And then things changed. I mean, you had the anonymous movement came along, you had the hacking of Sony Pictures, you had Edward Snowden leaks, you had the US presidential election in 2016. And every year there seemed to be some huge story that showed people that tech and tech crime was really important, was going to affect them. And that's how we got to the point where we are today.
And now you have an upcoming book about it, Rinsed. So you are, I guess, up until now, best known for The Lazarus Heist, the podcast series. And if anyone hasn't listened to it, I really encourage you to go and listen to it on the North Korean hacker cyber group. But back to this book. How did you get started on it?
Well, it was actually through the Lazarus Heist. So, as you said, Lazarus Heist is about North Korea and how North Korea, of all places, became a computer hacking superpower, which is a very unusual story, given that most people in North Korea don't have a computer, let alone internet access. Now, the accusation against North Korea is that because it's been sealed off through sanctions, North Korea keeps testing nuclear weapons and launching missiles, so it's been sanctioned. That means North Korea struggles to make money. Certainly in the way that we would normally make money as a country, the UK and Norway and other places. So the accusation is that North Korea's computer hackers have been trying to make money overseas by hacking. In a way, that's not a new innovation because North Korea has always been suspected of using its foreign operatives to make money. So there's long histories of its diplomats getting involved in peculiar deals overseas to bring money back to North Korea. So the hackers, in a way, are accused of just doing the same thing, going overseas, making money and bringing it back to the regime. But what that meant is that you get this fascinating thing with North Korea where on the one hand you've got nation-state cybercrime and all that espionage type stuff, but also you've got just organised crime, stealing money and pilfering it. Now what's interesting is the North Koreans seem to be very adept at breaking into places they shouldn't be, banks and crypto companies and other governments and so on. But when it comes to actually moving the money and getting the money out, that's not necessarily their skill set. You need a whole different set of skills. You need to understand how SWIFT works. You need to understand how IBANs work and how muling works and account creation and crypto wallets. That's not a hacker's skill set necessarily. Hackers are very good at, understanding malware and code and social engineering and that kind of thing. But when it comes to the finance system, that's not necessarily their expertise. So a lot of the time, hackers end up working with money launderers, professional money launderers, because it's like, I can break into the bank, but I need your help, buddy, to help me get the money out the other side.
Yeah, and you make this distinction in your book with hackers on one hand and then the money movers on the other hand.
Exactly, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, at the higher level, there are almost certainly computer hackers who understand, computer hacking groups who are skilled at both things and can handle their own money and so on. That's fine. But quite a lot of the time in the investigations I've done, you tend to find these cyber criminals reach out to and recruit money launderers who can help them move the money internationally. It just seems to be there are two different industries at work there. And what's interesting to note is that the hackers are reliant on these people. So one of the famous cases we covered in the Lazarus Heist, as well you'll know, is the hacking of Bangladesh Bank back in 2015. Now, they break into the bank in 2015. They steal the money a year later, almost exactly a year later, in 2016. Why? Why wait a year? You're in the bank, you can see the money, just nick it, steal it, get it now. Well, the problem they had was steal it and put it where? We're going to transfer it out of Bangladesh Bank to what? To Kim Jong-un's bank account in Pyongyang. It's, you need to have some laundering system to help you move the money. That's what took them a year. It took them a few weeks to break in.
So who are these money movers?
Well, there's a network of people around the world who are prepared to do this. And it varies. There's a really interesting sliding scale, I think, from the absolute knowing, complicit money launderer who knows exactly what they're doing. They're going out there touting for business, saying, I can help you move your money, and I know it's dodgy money. At the other end, of course, there are sometimes people who are unwittingly pulled into this. Crypto exchanges might get stolen money sent to them that they didn't know about, and it gets effectively washed through them. And in the middle, there's a grey area of people who maybe realise it's a bit dodgy, but for a higher fee, they'll process the money and, okay, we'll turn a blind eye to that. So you've got this range of people to work with now. And of course, new innovations like cryptocurrencies, like NFTs, video gaming currencies, marketplaces, all these open up new areas where money launderers can work. So you've got this outside of traditional finance and the traditional, backstreet money mules and money launderers. You've now got a whole area of tech that's opened up a whole new territory for a new set of high-tech launderers.
And that's what your book is about, how technology enables this type of money laundering. But you mentioned a lot of new technologies there, the cryptocurrencies, gaming currencies, all of that. But do these money launderers only work with the new technology? I assume they existed before these came along as well. So how is their technological, knowledge, or how, do they utilize all kinds of technologies or just the new ones?
It's interesting. I will be honest, I can't say whether your traditional sort of suitcase full of money launderer has now dropped the suitcase, got themselves a laptop and switched over. I suspect there's been an evolution. And look, the suitcase full of money people still exist. It's worth saying that a large amount of money laundering does go on through cash, and cash is still very useful because it's anonymous, but it's also difficult because it's bulky and it's physical and subject to inflation, all those kind of things. So there are still cash money launderers out there and cash broker services and so on. It's also worth saying that, the traditional banking sector is still the home of most money laundering. We talk about cryptocurrency laundering. Cryptocurrency obviously forms a tiny part of the world financial picture. And so the laundering that goes on through cryptocurrency is also a tiny part of that. So it's worth saying those things. But what's interesting about technology, and the reason I think that I wanted to write the book about that and look at that in terms of laundering, is that if you think about the things that you want as a money launderer, if you put yourself in the mind of a money launderer, you want, to my way of thinking, three things. The first thing you want is lots of money sloshing about. You want a big tornado of money so that you can hide your criminal money in it. That's thing number one. Thing number two you want is an international system. So you want to put your dodgy money in Los Angeles and withdraw it in London. And the third thing you want is lack of regulation. You do not want the police, the regulators looking over your shoulder. So those are three things. You want lots of money sloshing about, big values. You want international, lack of regulation. Now think about what a tech company wants. If you put yourself in the mind of a tech startup, someone like Uber or Airbnb or OnlyFans, you want lots of money sloshing about. That's good. And the values are all over the place. How much is an Uber taxi worth? Well, it varies. Sometimes loads, sometimes not much. Second thing you want international. You want to be able to launch your app everywhere in the world simultaneously. That's what tech companies want. And the third thing they want is places where there isn't much regulation. That's why they've gone for things like taxi booking and hotels and, the OnlyFans stuff, is because there's not much regulation around that. So it's not that technologists want to help money launderers. It's just that the stuff that technologists like in the products that they launch are the kind of things that money launderers also like in the system. So they end up inhabiting the same territory, even though they don't necessarily want to.
What was that surprised you the most when you wrote this book?
The Axie Infinity hack has to be one of the most sort of stunning things that came out of the books. This is a hack on a video game, Southeast Asian video game called Axie Infinity, which revolves around salamanders of all things. They're little salamander characters. And you wrestle your salamanders against the other salamanders, the other player's salamanders. And if you win, you get rewarded with Smooth Love Potion, which is this thing that allows you to breed the Axies together. It's a bizarre video game. I'm not a video gamer, but even by my standards, that's a weird game to be playing. But there was loads of money sloshing about in this game, because instead of just buying the game and taking it home and playing it, like I used to do when I was a kid, you buy into the game, you buy these Axies. And then when you do well, if they do well, you can sell them to somebody for a profit. So the whole game became a marketplace. And that Smooth Love Potion thing that you could feed to your Axies, that could be bought and sold. The whole thing became a marketplace. There was so much money sloshing about in this that when the hackers broke in, they managed to steal $625 million, which is, I've been slightly more circumspect in the book about this, but I will go out on a limb here and I will say, I think that is the biggest theft of all time. In terms of one hit on one victim in one go, valued at the time of the theft, 625 million is hard to beat. I can't find a case that beats that one. It's just an astonishing story. And then there's this whole sort of postscript to how they laundered the money and using crypto mixers, which has sparked this whole freedom of speech debate within the tech community and the crypto community. They're now suing the US government. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, this story. It's absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, I can't come to mind any bigger heist either. So yeah, I think it's got to be the biggest one.
There was during the first Iraq war, Saddam Hussein transferred 900 million, I think it was, out of the central bank of Baghdad to his son Qusay. But for me, that's not so much that's like corruption, kleptocracy. I draw a line between that and a criminal gang breaking in somewhere. I mean, he was the leader of the country, admittedly doing something very bad, but do you see what I mean? So there's lots of sort of dodgy kleptocracy kind of cases where there's loads more money involved. But I'm talking about a crime gang breaking in effectively to a vault and stealing a stash of money in one go. I can't find a bigger one than 625 million.
So the Axie story, that made the book.
Yes.
And people can read more about it because it's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
But were there any stories that didn't make the book that you think, it is worthy of telling?
Yeah, I mean, lots. I think writing a book is interesting. I think part of writing a book is deciding what you're not going to write about and what you leave out. And you have to be quite bold about that and say, no, I'm not going to cover that. I'm going to leave that one out. And some things, you try and write them and they just don't work out. They just don't really sort of get there. The one I was really annoyed that I couldn't cover, partly because there's not much technology involved in it, is this sort of fascinating thing that's emerged involving Mexico, the US, Canada, and China. So the way it works is there are Mexican drug gangs who are making fentanyl, which is obviously a huge problem in the US, lots of people taking this drug. They get the base chemicals for the fentanyl from China. So China ships the base chemicals across. The drug gangs in Mexico make the drugs, ship them north of the border to the US where they're sold. And the US has a huge and heartbreaking problem with fentanyl addiction at the moment. Now, the money from that would normally filter back down to Mexico. But in this case, it filters north up to Canada. And so the cash from those fentanyl deals is making its way up to Canada, where it's put into casinos and property deals and other types of laundering. There is a large Chinese community in Canada. I think the largest Chinese community outside China is actually based in Canada. And so what's happening is those people are effectively sending the money back to China. Now, the reason for that is China's got this restriction. You can't take out more than $50,000 a year from China because China wants to keep the money in the country. The ramification of that is people overseas, if you're a Chinese person in Canada and you want to buy a Harley Davidson for $60,000, well, you can't just pull the money out of your Chinese bank account. You've got to have some other way of doing it. So the way they do this is somebody in Canada will give them $60,000 in cash, which is proceeds of drugs, and that Chinese person will then free up $60,000 worth of Chinese currency in China. That money is then used to pay the people who make the fentanyl chemicals who ship it back to the Mexicans. And so you've got this amazing trans-Pacific fentanyl money laundering triangle going on. It's an absolutely astonishing story. It's been covered in the papers. There's a great book called Willful Blindness, which taps on this, is all about this. Just an unbelievable story. Unfortunately, has no technology involved in it really at all. It's all quite low tech. So it wasn't one for the book, but I think it's just a fascinating story.
Yeah, really fascinating. We did an episode on fentanyl, how crypto is part of paying for that with the Financial Times journalist. So for anyone listening, go back into the back catalog and check it out. Strise has been named one of the world's most innovative companies by Fast Company in 2024. Alongside the likes of NVIDIA, OpenAI, and even Taylor Swift Productions. Want to avoid bad blood with the regulators? We are tackling major anti-money laundering challenges by automating and resolving banks' data and workflow issues. Currently stuck with an outdated system? Shake it off. Strise is built with AI at its core. It's modular by design and ready for future challenges faced by banks. Need an anti-money laundering hero? Strise delivers value from day one. Our solution is packaged so that banks and financial institutions can immediately use and implement. Ready to start your automation love story? Visit strise.ai today. Back to the show. Now, working with this book and the Lazarus heist, how do you feel about technology now?
Yeah, it's interesting. How do I feel about technology now? That's never a question I've been asked before, and it's one I really struggle to answer. Because for me as a journalist, I'm not paid to feel things. Is that the right way of saying it? I don't have a view at the end of the day. And I've sometimes struggled with that. And people sort of ask me these questions, what do you think of this? What do you feel about this? My job is sort of put this stuff in front of the audience and just see what they make of it. If they're interested in it, fine. If they're outraged by it, then okay, that's a reaction. If you put this stuff in front of the audience and they just don't care about it, well, then it's not really a story. So for me, it's not so much what I feel about it, it's what the audience feels about it. I think in this case, there is a sense with cryptocurrency that people see this as being a new edifice, the financial system, which it is. And I think that there's a hunger, I think, for it to be used properly, used effectively, used efficiently. It can open up a whole new sways, whole new worlds, really, for international finance. But it's sort of dogged because it's only really a decade old or so, and so it's still finding its feet. So there's a lot of pressure put on crypto, I think, and new technologies, new financial technologies, to sort of work out and to be effective now. Now, governments are going after these areas and regulating them, trying to regulate them. We've obviously seen regulation around crypto or attempted regulation around crypto. For the crypto community, that's an uncomfortable challenge because, on the one hand, I think there's areas of the crypto community who absolutely see that regulation is important. But there's other areas of the crypto community who say, well, hang on, this is our invention. We created it. The banks, the governments, traditional academic institutions, you didn't build this. We built this. Us coders, us techies. So we control it. You can't come in here now with your rules from your world and enforce them on us because we built this world and we police it. So there's an interesting sort of battle there for the kind of soul of this new technology. That's what I feel sort of fascinated by. As to what I feel about it, I just think it's an interesting story.
And having uncovered some of these stories now, does it leave you optimistic? Or do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg and you are more thinking, oh, there's so much more to this, but it's not been put into the light of day? Yeah,
I feel conflicted because on the one hand, I meet the people who are trying to do enforcement around this, people at the FBI and the DOJ and the National Crime Agency in the UK, DOJ being Department of Justice in the US. And I see the battle that they're trying to do, and I hear the arguments from them. But I also meet, of course, people in the crypto and the tech community who are putting arguments about freedom of speech and privacy and liberty, and also the fact that, they own this technology. So I see an interesting battle emerging. What I really, really hope is that both of those sides can start to understand each other a little bit better. Frankly, there are people in government who don't understand how this stuff works. They just haven't a clue how any of this new financial technology works. They need to understand that. They need to get their hands dirty. They need to start talking to people and admit a bit of their ignorance and learn. Because if you're going to try and talk to these new technology companies and trying to rein them in and trying to say, hey, you should take money laundering seriously, you've got to understand how their technology works. We cannot have a situation, as happened in the US, where the chief executive of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, appears and senators are questioning this man and don't have a clue how his business works. That was embarrassing because it showed us that the people in charge don't understand how the technology works that we all use every day. We can't have that. We've got to have our regulators and our law enforcement people understanding how this stuff works in a really hands-on way, because then you can have a conversation and say, hey, I looked at your company, I understand the model, and now can we talk about regulation? Now can we talk about money laundering? If you just go in there and say, look, I've got no idea about your technology, but here's the rules, buddy, I don't think you're going to get very far.
I agree. And what do you think are the real-world consequences of not getting financial crime and technology together in the right way?
One of the things I've tried to do in the book is to sort of really highlight the consequences of financial crime and of money laundering. One of the big problems, I think, with coverage of money laundering is often it can seem a quite dry, quite academic subject. And that's not helped by the media coverage of it, because often the headlines are about compliance failures. This bank was fined for compliance failures. And the public read it and think, well, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? It sounds like a sort of slap on the wrist parking ticket. That's not the case. That money laundering that was done through that bank would have enabled a whole bunch of crime, probably quite serious crime as well. And so what I've tried to do in the book is to reverse that and say, right, instead of talking about money laundering, I'm going to start with the crime, start with the offence that creates the money. Then you'll see the harm. So I've looked at cartel drug dealing, I've looked at prostitution and trafficking, I've looked at child sexual abuse. All of these things have serious consequences. I've spoken to women who've been trafficked and whose lives were frankly ruined by that process, as you can imagine, inevitably. And then you go to the money. You say, okay, that made money for these people here, and here's how they laundered it. Without starting with the crime and the damage, you never really get people to care about the laundering that happens afterwards. You've got to start with the ramifications first and then say, and here's how the money is laundered, because then people will care about the laundering. So yes, there are absolutely real-world consequences to this. To go back to the point I made at the beginning, a lot of organised crime just can't proceed without some laundering mechanism. You don't do the crime unless you can pull your money out at the end of the day. Pulling the money out needs launderers. If I want to do a crime and I want to rob a bunch of people or traffic a bunch of people, but I'm not going to get any money out of it at the end, well, why would I do it? I need the launderers to help me get the money. Without them, I can't get the money. Without them, I don't do the crime. So the consequences of the financial crime area and the laundering area are really serious.
That is really fascinating, and I couldn't agree more, because I think it's really important to not just think about it as compliance, but the real world consequences. And that is one of the things we try to do with this podcast as well, try to showcase the importance of the work and what happens if you don't get it right. So thank you for sharing that. We are now at the end, but I will not let you go before we do a quick fire round questions.
I hate these. I normally spend weeks thinking about things as an investigative journalist. Quick fire is not what I do.
Okay, I hope you're ready.
Do your worst.
Let's go. What was the most shocking fact you discovered while researching this book?
Most shocking fact was the child sexual abuse case that we covered, a site called Welcome to Video, which was processing Bitcoin transactions for awful, awful material. It's an absolutely shocking case. But the good news is the person behind it did get caught, did get convicted, along with a whole bunch of other people. So a happy outcome, at least.
Has the rise of the online world been good or bad for fighting financial crime?
Both. Which is a cheap answer. But look, it's obviously enabled, as I outline in the book, a whole bunch of financial crime to happen through these unregulated new finance type channel, video gaming, NFTs, cryptocurrency and so on. However, companies like yourself and others are now using technology, using AI, using machine learning to fight back against that, spotting patterns and so on. So it's a mixed picture, and it's a classic cat and mouse game at the moment.
What would you say to those who say financial crime is victimless?
I'd say read my book, because from page 1, I identify victim after victim after victim of this. You can't cover this stuff without coming across a victim. If they say it's a victimless crime, you're not looking hard enough at the story.
What would be the subject of your next book?
To be announced, but it will be in the area of cybercrime and international financial flows, and I suspect the Russian Federation will feature quite heavily.
Interesting. Everyone, I encourage you to go and buy and read Rinsed when it comes out. When is it out, Geoff?
It's out on June the 13th. You can pre-order it now as we sit here now, but yeah, June the 13th is when it hits the book stands, as it were.
Encourage everyone to do that. That brings this spin of the laundry to an end. Geoff, thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find and connect with you?
LinkedIn's probably the best place. If you just search Geoff White on LinkedIn, it's Geoff with a G, Geoff, the British way.
Money makes a world go round.
And thanks to everyone who was listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, go check out the back catalog and follow The Laundry on your podcast platform of choice. We'd also love for you to share the podcast on your social media channels. It really helps people find us. Got a story you think deserves The Laundry treatment? You can comment on the Strise LinkedIn page, my LinkedIn page, or email laundry@strise.ai. Your host for this episode was me, Marit. Our producer was Matthew. Our engineers were Dominic and Nicholas. The Laundry is proudly produced by Strise, the AML automation cloud. Your data problem and your workflow problem? Now it isn't your problem. Visit strise.ai for more information. See you soon.
Your money make a world go round.